We now come to the Statement Secretary of State, Lucy Fraser.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to update the House on the proposed acquisition by the Telegraph Media Group by RB Investco Limited. I will refer to the Telegraph Media Group as the Telegraph and RB Investco Limited as the purchaser. As the House will know, the sale of the Telegraph is currently subject to the media mergers process. And today, I would like to confirm that the purchaser has notified me of their intention to sell the call option agreement that gives them the ability to buy the Telegraph, in effect, withdrawing from the purchase of the newspaper. This step follows the intervention I made on this merger situation on the 26th of January this year, both to issue a public interest intervention notice, or PIN, and to issue a preemptive action order, which I will refer to as the order. It follows on from the announcement I made on the 19th of March of my assessment following the reports of the CMA and Ofcom that I was minded to refer this merger to a further more detailed Phase 2 investigation. I've taken these decisions on the basis of the evidence in this case and will continue to do so. I am now updating the House on the procedures and protections for the public interest that are now in place in respect of the Telegraph, given the sale process, which I understand will begin shortly. I have informed the parties that it would not be appropriate at this stage for me to take a decision on whether or not to make a Phase 2 reference. In my view, the relevant merger situation remains in contemplation. I therefore continue to have powers under the order to prevent actions by the parties to the merger that might prejudice any Phase 2 reference to the CMA or make it more difficult for me to take action as a result of my final decision following such a reference. The order therefore prohibits the parties from making significant organisational and staff changes, including the editorial team, without my consent. These restrictions remain in place. However, I have now agreed to derogations from the order, which will give the parties the flexibility and regulatory space to make all reasonable preparations for the sale of the call option agreement. It's important to be clear that I will not be engaging with prospective buyers, nor selecting the preferred bidder. The sale process will be run by Redbird IMI alone. My decision on any further derogation from the order that Redbird IMI will need to receive to complete the sale of the call option agreement will be made according to my powers and obligations under the Enterprise Act and based on the public interest, rather than a qualitative decision on who should buy the titles. Any transfer to new ownership will also potentially be subject to the media mergers regime as set out in the Enterprise Act. Mr. Speaker, it's appropriate for me to say a few words about the underlying matters. I initiated this process under the powers I have under the Enterprise Act to protect the accurate presentation of news and free expression of opinion in newspapers. These powers are vital. Freedom of the press, that is the press's freedom to express opinions, to criticise and hold power to account, are all a fundamental part of our democracy. It is often said that freedom of the press is not actually their freedom, but ours that they are protecting. It would not be appropriate for a foreign state to interfere with the accurate presentation of our news or the freedom of expression in newspapers. Whilst these powers are broad under the existing media merger regime, the government has also taken action to rule out newspaper and news magazine mergers involving any influence, ownership or control by foreign states. We've done that by amending the Digital Markets Competition and Consumer Bill, which is shortly returning to this House. Mr. Speaker, as a nation, we are also a proud, open democracy, a strong trading power with a vibrant economy. And whilst we are quite rightly limiting powers to interfere with our democracy, as many other states do, in terms of foreign investment more generally, we remain open for business. I would like to end by recognising the strength of feeling in this House and the other place, and particularly the work done by the DCMS Minister of State, my honourable friend, the member for Hornchurch and Upminster, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State, Lord Parkinson of Whitley Bay, and in particular, the Right Honourable the Baroness Stowell of Beeston. I commend this statement to the House.
Hear, hear.
Shadow Secretary of State, Thagang Dabara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance sight of the statement. From the very start, Labour had questions about the proposed sale of some of our country's most highly influential and historic news publications. We share legitimate public interest concerns about the accurate presentation of news, free expression of opinion and fair competition. Freedoms we cannot take for granted. It's disappointing that this weak government didn't do the right thing from the start. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that this isn't about singling out the UAE, our important partners? She said it isn't appropriate for a foreign state to interfere with the accurate presentation of news. I'm glad she came round to that point of view. But surely no government anywhere in the world, including ours, should own any news publications. Labour will always act to safeguard the UK's strong and independent free press, regardless of any publication's political persuasion. We will champion their right to hold us to account. We will safeguard the freedom to scrutinise, to expose wrongdoing and to speak truth to power, because this is about protecting our democracy. We, of course, welcome investment that makes a valuable contribution to our diverse media landscape, so we will follow this auction process closely. Can she give us more information on the timescale for the auction? What discussions has she had with trade unions representing staff at the Telegraph Media Group? What steps will she be taking to ensure that this is a free and open sale, and will she keep the House updated? What will she do to ensure a competitive media landscape into the future? It's important that the Secretary of State gets this right, especially in an election year. Our democracy is too precious to leave to chance.
Well, I'm very grateful for the honourable members' welcoming of this statement and the position that we now find ourselves in. And I do reiterate the point that she made to say that the UAE is an important trading partner, and the position in relation to the legislation is absolutely that this is in relation to all foreign states, and we do welcome our relationship with the UAE. She says this is an important point, and I have been very conscious of this matter since the matter first fell on my desk, and have raised from the outset the concerns and dealt with the concerns in this case. I do not recall, Mr. Speaker, although she's only raised it now, so I'm not looking at the complete record, but I don't recall any occasion when she has raised this matter directly, either with me or in this House. This is an important principle, the freedom of the press. It is one that we are upholding. And as I said in my statement, the powers under the Act were already broad, and I was taking steps in relation to them in a quasi-judicial fashion, which of course limits the other measures that one can take. In relation to timescale, I understand the certainty that is needed for the publication and for those working within that, and I expect and hope that this will be concluded in short order, understanding, of course, that it is important for the sale process to take place. This is a regulatory process, and of course, at appropriate stages, I will, of course, update members in the House.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Caroline Downage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement and the decision of Redbird IMI to effectively withdraw from purchasing the Telegraph. Of course, freedom and can't even say it, plurality, are cornerstones of our media, and political intervention should always be the last resort. But I, of course, agree with her that it is absolutely unacceptable for foreign states to have the potential to interfere with the independence and freedom of our press. But can I just ask her, what is the role of Redbird during the period it takes for a prospective buyer to be found, and will they be able to hold a non-controlling stake in the Telegraph at the end of this process?
The position in relation to the governance of the Telegraph during this period is the same as it has been since I started this regulatory process. I have been concerned at all times to ensure that the independence of the directors, the independence of the management and the editorial team remains, which is why I brought forward a preemptive order which would restrict any changes in that regard. There will now be a sales process of course, that process will have to follow any regulations that are in force and that will govern it.
Spokesperson Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of the statement. My frontbench colleague from Oakhill and South Perthshire and the SNP more widely are pleased about the decision and the announcement that has been made today in relation to this. It does feel like the protection and the independence of and legitimacy of the media is something that people feel strongly about across the House, no matter which party we represent. And I'm pleased that everybody is speaking with one voice in terms of the blocking of foreign interference in our media outlets. I do wonder about the way that this process has happened and whether the Secretary of State is going to have a look at how this process worked and whether or not RB Invesco, for example, and UAE were able to exploit loopholes in order to ensure the process took longer than it could have in order for this decision to be made, and if there are ways to tighten up the Enterprise Act and the legislation in order to ensure that those decisions can be made more quickly and loopholes cannot be exploited. And just lastly on this, it is the case that legacy media outlets are struggling in a lot of ways, and many of them may be looking at alternative ways in order to fund what they are doing. But can the Secretary of State make clear that, like us, that she feels that that freedom of the press from foreign interference is incredibly important, no matter what the financial situation of the companies in question?
So, Mr Speaker, the honourable member talks about tightening up the process, and of course we've made a significant tightening of the process in the amendment that the government brought forward in the House of Lords, which is coming back to the House today. That will indeed make sure that there can be no ownership, control or influence by a foreign state, because indeed, as the honourable member makes clear, that is an important part of our democracy.
Sir John Whittingdale.
My right friend will be aware that at the end of this week is World Press Freedom Day, and so her statement is particularly welcome, and I congratulate her on the scrupulous way in which she has undertaken her responsibilities. But she will be aware that the Enterprise Act was written before the internet existed, and it's 6 years since Ofcom said there needs to be a fundamental review of our media merger regime. Can she therefore say what progress is being made to bring the entire regime up to date, to take account of the massive growth of online news distribution?
I'm very grateful for all the support that my right honourable friend gave me when he was within the department and the expertise that he brought with him on this and so many other matters. When I say this, I mean the media more widely. Of course, he makes a very important point that the media landscape is changing, and that's why we are looking at whether online news should be included within the scope of Ofcom's powers.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There will be a number of staff at the Telegraph Media Group worried about their jobs. So what conversations has the Secretary of State had with trade union representatives of staff at the Media Group? And having just met the amazing, bright, talented students at Luton Sixth Form who are visiting today, some of whom may want a future in journalism, could she say what impact this may have on media jobs and our ability to ensure a competitive media landscape in the future?
One of the measures that I took when making the public interest notice and the preemptive order that followed that was to ensure that whatever decision that I took ultimately on this case, that the Telegraph Media Group was not prejudiced by the potential purchase. So the preemptive order has always said that there should be no changes to the management of the Telegraph or the editorial team without my consent, to ensure that any changes in the interim wouldn't be prejudiced by any ultimate sale. So I can give the honourable member the reassurance that there are measures already in place to protect the staff at the Telegraph Group in terms of this purchase. And by the order today, I have highlighted that preemptive order in relation to that staff continue.
Sorry, Duncan-Smith.
Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for coming forward with this statement and for making the right decision. But this whole process, does it not, demonstrates pretty much what our honourable friend said earlier on, that we are dealing with a digital world with analogue tools, and it takes far too long. It also led to the peculiar position with both herself and her ministerial colleague having to come to the dispatch box, but unable to say anything at all in answer to any questions, which was in some senses slightly unfair on them. The reality, therefore, I know there's an amendment coming through on another bill, but we really need to speed this process up by saying very simply that no foreign state could own any of our media, and we now need to look at the online elements of that as well, if we can.
I would like to offer my friend, my right honourable friend, reassurance, because that legislation is coming to the House today, and I know a lot of members of this House and the other House raised those concerns, and it's right that we brought forward an amendment to ensure and put beyond absolute doubt that it would be inappropriate for a foreign state to own our news media. And that's why we built on Baroness Stoll's amendment to put that beyond doubt and put it in a form that works very well. And I'm very grateful for Baroness Stoll for the work that she puts into her amendment. And I do recognise that other point that my right honourable friend said in relation to online media, and that is absolutely something that we are already looking at.
James Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I think thanks are due to the Secretary of State for this decision. The Spectator will be free from foreign influence and can carry on describing me as a languid old gent who represents a craggy constituency somewhere near Norway. But, as the Secretary of State says, that is freedom of speech, and one must put up with what one must put up with. Good luck to all these eminent publications. Does the Secretary of State realise, however, that also fundamental to democracy and freedom of speech are the continued survival of our myriad of local newspapers, the length and breadth of this sceptred isle, because they are in difficulty, and if they go down, I believe poverty is the poorer of it. And while I do not expect an answer, could I at least ask Secretary of State to look at this issue as one that is really rather important?
I absolutely understand that, and I've done a number of roundtables talking to the local media sector. The honourable member will be aware that in the past we've had a local news fund. He will be aware of the measures that we have, for example, in relation to business rates, in relation to local news media, and I'm very conscious of the need to support our local media, who play a vital role in ensuring that we have local democracy. He will also know in the mid-term review, one of the measures that we put in was to ensure that where the BBC took action to take steps in spaces where there was already a competitive media market, that they should engage more widely with those that they were affecting.
John Rayburn.
I strongly welcome the Secretary of State's clear statement of policy that foreign states should not be allowed to take over press and media in this country. I think it's a very welcome development. I do hope that in the proposals for amending the law, it will be very clear that that's not just a government, but it could be a nationalised industry, it could be a public authority, it could be a company with a shareholding by a state of significant influence, because otherwise they might try and find ways around it. But I'm sure she's up to that. But can we please have an amendment that absolutely nails press freedom in the way we want it, free of influence from foreign states?
I understand the point that my right honourable friend makes, because it is important that when we bring forward legislation, that it deals with all the we don't have loopholes within that legislation, and we've thought about that as a department very carefully. How do we protect against that? I think he will see when the legislation comes back to this House this afternoon that we've defined foreign state ownership very broadly, and we've actually extended the definition of foreign state ownership, and it includes not only ownership, it also includes control and influence.
Thank you.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Further to the excellent point by my honourable friend from Luton North, can I just press her a bit further? She did say in her statement that the order prohibits the parties from making significant organisational and staff changes without her consent, and that the restrictions remain in place. So will she agree not to consent to any deal that involves significant job losses?
Will obviously be entirely inappropriate when exercising a quasi-judicial function to make a decision on the basis of what decision I might take without looking at the evidence, and that is exactly what I would do.
Alexander Stafford.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I welcome this statement, and it's not because it's the UAE, because UAE, after all, is a great diplomatic friendship and a trading partner of the UK, but to get rid of foreign involvement in our media. Could you say a bit more, please, firstly, about how she's going to stop online media being affected by international media and television media, because those are the growing media outlets. But also, we talk about freedom of the press, but could you give some more advice about freedom of getting rid of disinformation? Because when in the UK, we've got people like Press TV and China Daily, which are propaganda arms of quite nefarious regimes operating and working in the UK. What is this government doing to stop those sort of nefarious activities poisoning the minds of our young people?
Mr Speaker, there's so much in there that one could respond to. I would like to remind the right honourable member and my honourable friend that we are bringing in, we are looking at the online news space. That's absolutely vital. It is important to emphasise that Ofcom already has significant powers in the broadcast space, has already taken actions in relation to foreign state involvement or foreign involvement in our broadcast media over here, has banned certain entities from operating, and of course we always need to look at how do we tackle misinformation, and that is something that we're doing across government as a whole.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State very much for her positivity and her responses. And can I ask the Secretary of State, could she highlight what steps can be taken to ensure that the scrambling that took place to protect freedom of British speech and media by international corporations is not replicated and is considered being given legislative protection to this effect, knowing that this protection is vital as outside influences seek to sway public perception for their own ends, and this has to be recognised and it also has to be protected. Thanks so much.
Well, it is important that we always have freedom of the press and that external forces don't interfere with that freedom. I'm in fact doing a speech this afternoon which the Honourable Gentleman might wish to read after I've done it to the Society of Editors, but I'm very happy also to consider the points that he has made.
Ray Chishley.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome the statement and the decision by the Secretary of State. That's in our national interest to protect our free media. The question I have for the Secretary of State is this with regards to transparency and understanding the logic behind this decision. The Secretary of State has said that she's taken into account the evidence. What key evidence did she take into account? What three things would you say were the key pertinent aspects of that evidence that led to her to make that decision? Because that gives people outside the opportunity to look at the reasoning and the rationale behind the decision.
The first decision that I took was that the threshold had been passed. I was concerned about the interference with the accurate presentation of news and the freedom of the press, and on the evidence that I had seen enabled me to say that that threshold had been passed, to ask Ofcom and the CMA to look at the matter more broadly, and they did do that. They took some time to give me a very detailed report, which I further considered, and I have set out in the letter that I sent in March, setting out the evidence from that report as to the decision that I then made, that I was minded to send the matter to a phase 2 investigation, and that letter in which I've set out the evidence on which I relied, I believe has been published.
Garden.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. As a former journalist, indeed a former member of the Society of Editors in Scotland, can I welcome the statement today from the Secretary of State, because press freedom is vital in our democracy, as she says, and the insidious influence of foreign states has to be protected against, not just in newspapers, but as we've heard, in online, and television and radio. But could I ask her, would she agree with me that this is not something which, with this step, is settled? That what we have to do is be continually aware of the danger of foreign interference and the insidious growth of that influence in our media by all means. So will the government take that on board and continue to monitor the situation on a regular basis?
Well, of course, the government always keeps under review. But I would like to give the honourable member some reassurance. I mean, we do have a very robust system to deal with the interference with press freedom. We had that in the Enterprise Act, and the powers that I had as Secretary of State under the Enterprise Act were clear and were robust in relation to the interference with the accurate presentation of news and the freedom of the press. And I took various decisions at each stage to ensure that those matters were fully investigated. And the honourable member can also take reassurance from the fact that we are now putting that beyond doubt, that a foreign state cannot interfere with our newspapers in the legislation that will be coming back to this House this afternoon, because every member who's expressed a view across this chamber is of the view, and a view I absolutely share, that a foreign state should not be able to control or influence or own a British newspaper.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I welcome this intervention, meaning that the UAE cannot now own the Telegraph through Redbird IMI. But there's also a suggestion that foreign governments could potentially interfere with free speech at universities that host institutes partly funded by foreign governments. The government-appointed Director of Freedom of Speech and Academic Freedom has warned that foreign interference at universities is going on in the UK. So what lessons, if any, will be instructive for the government's so-called universities' free speech SAR?
Mr Speaker, I'm wholly in favour of free speech and the insurance of ensuring that people are not shut down for their views. I think the honourable member needs to further take up his point with those responsible for universities.